My sister looked across that steakhouse table, straight at my son's new boss, and said, "Don't mind Denise. She's been a loser since high school. Some people just never grow out of it." The table went quiet. My son's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. And Mr. Whitfield, the man deciding whether my son kept his job, just stared at me like he was waiting to see what kind of woman would sit there and take it. I didn't say a word. Not one. But 3 weeks later, that same man would be the one who made my sister wish she'd never opened her mouth. Welcome back to Frontline Retribution, the channel for quiet people who get pushed 1 inch too far, and the moment the truth finally walks through the front door. If you've ever been the one who showed up when nobody was watching, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. My name is Denise Caro. I'm 48 years old, and I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a 1-bedroom apartment off 21st Street that I've called home for 6 years. I work the overnight shift as a ward clerk at St. Francis Hospital. 12-hour shifts, 3 nights a week, sometimes 4 when the schedule gets thin. My son Caleb is 24. I raised him alone since he was 6, after his father decided Oklahoma wasn't for him anymore. And neither, apparently, were we. Caleb had just landed a job as a junior operations analyst at a logistics company downtown, the kind of job with a badge and a parking spot and a 401k. The kind of job I never had. His boss, Mr. Douglas Whitfield, had invited the team and their families to a dinner at a steakhouse on Riverside to celebrate the end of the quarter. My older sister Renee, who'd married well and never let anyone forget it, invited herself along because Whitfield's wife sat on some charity board with her. That's how she ended up at that table. That's how she ended up across from me. I want to be clear about something before this story goes any further. I didn't hate my sister. I want that on the record. Renee had her own weight to carry. Our mother had put her through the ringer as a kid, always comparing her to cousins with better grades, and Renee grew up needing to win every room she walked into just to feel steady. I understood that, even when it cost me. Understanding it didn't make it hurt less. The disrespect didn't start at that dinner table. It started years before, in small cuts that never healed right. At Thanksgiving, she'd ask me in front of everyone if I'd found anything better than the hospital yet. Like ward clerk was a placeholder job I was too slow to leave. At Caleb's high school graduation, she showed up 40 minutes late in a dress that cost more than my rent, and told people she'd helped raise him too. Which wasn't true. Not for 1 single day. I let it go. I always let it go. I told myself family was family, and Caleb needed an aunt in his life even if she came with sharp edges. What she didn't know, what nobody knew. Not even Caleb was that 18 months earlier, when Caleb was studying for the certification exam that got him the interview at Whitfield's company. I picked up every extra shift the hospital would give me. I skipped my own dentist appointment twice. I let my car insurance lapse for 1 terrifying month and prayed nothing happened, just so I could pay for his exam fees and a decent interview suit from the Men's Warehouse on Memorial. I never told him where the money came from. I told him I'd found a little extra in savings. There was no savings. There was just me, doing the math at 2 a.m. in the break room, figuring out what I could go without. I still think about what happened after that. The dinner started fine. Whitfield seemed like a decent man, the kind who asked real questions and listened to the answers. Caleb was glowing, telling stories about a shipment reroute he'd handled that saved the company almost $11,000. I sat there proud, quiet, sipping water, because the entrees alone were $34, and I wasn't about to order a cocktail on top of that. Renee ordered a bottle of wine for the table without asking anyone, then made a comment about how she'd cover it this time. glancing at me like I should be grateful. Looking back, that should have been my warning. Somewhere between the salads and the steaks, Whitfield's wife asked me what I did for work. I told her. Hospital ward clerk, St. Francis, overnight shift. Nothing dramatic. Renee laughed, not a mean laugh exactly. More like the laugh you give when you think you're being charming, and said, Denise has always worked nights. Keeps her out of everyone's way, I guess. A few people chuckled because they didn't know what else to do with a comment like that. I felt my face go hot, but I smiled and let it pass, the way I'd let 100 comments pass before. I thought things couldn't get worse. I was wrong. It was the dessert menu that did it. Whitfield asked Caleb, kindly, whether anyone in the family had a background in logistics or operations. Said it must run in the blood. And before Caleb could answer, before I could even open my mouth, Renee set down her wine glass and said it. Don't mind Denise. She's been a loser since high school. Some people just never grow out of it. The table didn't laugh that time. Caleb's face went white, then red. Whitfield's wife looked down at her plate. And Whitfield himself, a man I had met exactly 1 hour earlier, looked at me the way you look at someone you're trying to figure out. Not with pity, with curiosity, like he was recalculating something. I didn't defend myself. I didn't cry. I said, excuse me, folded my napkin and walked to the restroom, where I stood at the sink for 4 full minutes, doing nothing but breathing. Because if I opened my mouth right then, I was going to say something I couldn't take back at my own son's celebration dinner. That was the moment everything began to shift, though I had no idea how, or when, or that it would involve the very man sitting at that table. The weeks after that dinner were the quietest, loneliest stretch I'd had since Caleb's father left. Caleb didn't call as much. I don't think it was anger at me, I think it was shame. The specific kind of shame you feel when someone humiliates a person you love and you didn't know how to stop it fast enough. But the silence landed the same, either way. My phone stopped buzzing at the hours it used to. I ate a lot of dinners standing over the sink, because sitting down at an empty table felt worse, somehow. Ramen, mostly. The 10 for $1 kind from the Reese's on 15th. Because my rent had just gone up $60 a month and my car needed a new alternator I couldn't afford yet. I picked up more shifts. I told myself it was for the overtime pay, and it was partly, but mostly I think I needed somewhere to be that wasn't my own apartment, wasn't my own head, replaying that sentence over and over. Some people just never grow out of it. At 3 a.m. On a Tuesday, restocking supply carts in an empty hallway, I finally let myself cry about it, quietly. The kind of crying you do when you're 48 years old and still haven't figured out how to make a sentence like that stop hurting. My landlord left a notice on my door about the late fee from the month I'd fallen behind covering Caleb's exam costs. $85 I didn't have sitting around. I paid it 2 days late anyway, in cash, counted out at the kitchen table from an envelope I kept behind a box of cereal. Nobody knew about that envelope. Nobody knew what I'd given up to fill it. More than once, over the years. I wish I had left sooner. Not left Tulsa. Not left my life. But left that table the second Renee opened that bottle of wine, like she owned the room. I keep thinking if I'd stood up sooner, said something sooner, Caleb wouldn't have had to sit there and watch his boss, watch his mother get humiliated. The turning point came from a place I never expected, the hospital. 6 weeks after that dinner, I was working the overnight desk when a woman was brought into the ER. Chest pain, high anxiety, alone, and scared out of her mind because her husband was traveling for work. I sat with her for 20 extra minutes after my shift technically ended, holding her hand, talking her through her breathing until the cardiac team took over. Because that's just what you do. I didn't think twice about it. I never got her name that night. Not really. The chart said R. Whitfield and it didn't register. 3 days later, Douglas Whitfield called Caleb into his office. Caleb thought he was getting written up for something. Instead, Whitfield asked him, carefully, "Is your mother's name Denise? Does she work nights at St. Francis?" Caleb said yes, confused. Whitfield told him his wife had a scare at the hospital that week, and the woman who sat with her, who kept her calm until the doctors came, who never once made her feel like a burden or a bother, that woman was his mother. The next phone call explained everything, and it came from Caleb, his voice thick, telling me Whitfield wanted to meet me, not out of pity, out of respect. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital, not a steakhouse this time. Whitfield thanked me plainly, without making a production of it. And then he said something I didn't expect. He said that dinner had bothered him for weeks, the comment my sister made. And more than that, the way I'd absorbed it without a single word of self-defense. He said, "I've been in enough rooms to know the difference between a person with nothing to offer and a person who's just never been given the room to offer it." Then he asked if I'd ever consider working patient coordination on the administrative side of a healthcare logistics contract his company was bidding on: steady hours, daylight shift, real benefits, built on exactly the kind of calm, detail-driven work he'd watched me do for his wife. Without being asked, I said yes before he finished the sentence. Renee found out the way Renee finds out everything through other people. Filtered and exaggerated. But this time the exaggeration didn't need to work very hard. At a family dinner a month later, in front of our mother and 2 cousins, she brought it up like she was still trying to win. "I heard you got some kind of hospital job through Caleb's company," she said, half smiling, waiting for the old dynamic to click back into place. I just told her the truth, plainly the way I should have told her the truth years ago. That Mr. Whitfield's wife had a health scare. That I'd sat with a stranger because it was the right thing to do. And that the same man who watched her call me a loser at that table was the one who decided I wasn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Caleb, sitting beside me, finally said something he'd never said out loud before. "She's not a loser, Aunt Renee. She's the reason I have anything at all." The table went quiet in a very different way than it had at that steakhouse. I don't tell this story because I want anyone to think less of my sister. I think about the little girl she used to be, always trying to outshine cousins who never even noticed she was competing. I understand where that hunger to win comes from. But understanding it doesn't mean I owe her my silence forever. What I learned, sitting in that restroom 4 minutes at a time, working nights nobody saw, filling envelopes nobody knew about, is that the people who matter were paying attention the whole time, even when I thought I was invisible. Douglas Whitfield didn't rescue me. He just finally saw what had been true the entire time I was quietly doing the work. If this story hit you somewhere real, you know what to do. Subscribe to Frontline Retribution, and don't forget to drop a comment below. I read every single one.